much better viewership with the live streams. But it takes some time. So I guess you guys don't see the viewer numbers, do you? Okay.
We'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just tell us it's 100,000 people. We'll be
Oh
happy.
yeah, exactly.
You timed this so well, though. It's like nothing better than a live stream that was pre-scheduled with breaking news.
That's right. All right. So, welcome everyone to Let's Talk Markets live. Let's Talk Markets live. We're really thrilled to be joined today by Justin Slaughter, the VP of Regulatory Affairs from Paradigm, and Lee Schneider, General Counsel for Ava Labs, specifically focused on Avalanche. So, guys, thanks for jumping on. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Great to be here as always, Dave.
Yeah. So, the impetus for this was crypto and the election.
Wait, there was an election?
Yeah,
Holy
I don't
cow.
know.
I
if
mean,
you
I was actually
heard.
saying, yeah, there was an election in the far distant past of 2 weeks ago.
Have you guys seen the price of Bitcoin? I don't know if you check that regularly or not. It's really something.
It's a doozy.
It's a doozy. So yeah, and we got, I guess, lucky that Gary Gensler, right before we jumped on the live stream, has announced his official resignation.
Well,
As
you
of
just made
January
it sound
20th.
like it's, yeah, right. You got to add the date in there, Dave. Otherwise, people will be like, oh, today?
Yeah. I know. I was wrong on the date a few days ago when I called it. I fell victim
I saw that.
to
I was like, what? He's announced he's leaving? What?
yeah. I fell victim to X. Won't happen
Twitter, you mean?
again. But
Got
sometimes,
community noted. It's brutal.
yeah. Sometimes I don't know if you know this. There's some misinformation on that network, and it got me that time. So anyway, we got 2 months left to Gensler. Do you think he's going to do anything in those 2 months?
Do you want to take this to start, Lee, or should I?
I'd love to hear what you think, Justin.
All right. So let me start by noting, to be clear, any partisan views I may express here today are mine, not an official position of the firm. Paradigm has both experienced Republicans and Democrats on our team, and we focus on what's best for crypto, not what is best for one party or another. Having said all that, my sense very much is that the odds are low the SEC is going to make major statements. I mean, the thing about a policy in politics is that power flows down like a leaky bucket. And when you announce you are leaving, it is like tearing the hole out of the bottom of it. If he wanted to do a lot, it would be much smarter for him to say, I might stay, I might go, and push things forward. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a super active period. Obviously, the SC took a loss today on the dealer rule in court at I think that was the southern
That's a
district
big
of
loss,
Texas.
too.
It was a district in Texas. I think it was Southern District, Texas. So I tend to think the odds are
Amazing
low.
how much regulatory policy is being set out of Texas these days.
It's been true for a spell. Courts matter. But what is also the case, though, is that the way the SEC works is it doesn't move terribly quickly. It's a super tanker, not a fighter jet. Usually the way things operate is that you have rules. They have to go around the 10th floor where the chairman and commissioners officially sit, so they call it the 10th floor, for about a month before they can be voted on. And like today is November 21st. In about a month, it's going to be the hot Christmas holidays. And then you're basically in January and leading up to the end of the administration. Also, obviously, we know there will be a Republican trifecta in the Senate and House and White House. That means any rules finished between now and then would be subject to what's called the Congressional Review Act. Congressional Review Act, we can go into detail, basically allows Congress to delete a rulemaking, which further, I think, reduces the odds of activity by any individual commission.
With the president's signature.
Yes, it's true. But they did this.
Well, and that was very important on the SAB 121 stuff, which passed both houses of Congress. But unfortunately, President Biden chose not to sign it.
Although that's the thing, right? Before Donald Trump came into office in 2017, the CRA had been used one time, and they used it 16 times that year. I should know because the first rule they did CRA back in 2017 was the one I'd worked on. It was on the resource extraction rule. Oh, yeah, resource extraction rule, which was requiring that you have to basically disclose you make a payment to a government in connection with oil and gas payments. It's something I worked on back when I was a Hill staffer and also at CFTC a little bit. And that was first rule taken down by the CRA. It's still, they had to then do it again because it's required by Dodd-Frank. But I saw this firsthand that they spent a lot of time and energy undoing rules. And so I think a lot of people understand that anything finished now is like a red flag in front of a bull. It's like guaranteeing, if you're not anything resembling unanimous, you're going to get knocked down.
Yeah, I largely agree with you, Justin. The real question in my mind is, what are they going to do in terms of enforcement cases? Are they going to bring a bunch of new enforcement cases or not? Enforcement cases still require at least 3 commissioners to vote in favor of them, and we've got the 3 Dems there, so they have traditionally voted as a block on the enforcement cases. And so it'll be very interesting to see what, if any, new enforcement cases happen over the course of the next 2 months. I do think that if any are brought against any enforcement cases that get brought, the market is just going to shrug off. It doesn't matter who it is, because the market will realize that this is just the parting shot from the old regime until the new regime is in place. My guess is, and this is based on no information whatsoever, that the 2 Republicans will be heavily lobbying at least one of the Dems to say, don't do anything, don't do anything, it's not worth doing anything. You're just going to cause all kinds of problems for people that don't need to have those problems. Yeah. And I have no idea if that's going to be effective or not, but I do think, as we have seen, there have been a lot of enforcement cases, and not just in blockchain and crypto, all over the place, all kinds of enforcement, and so I think it's the paradigm is going to shift there. Just the question of, is it going to shift before Jan 20 at noon, when Chair Gensler is supposed to resign, or after Jan 20 at noon?
So let's think about that. I mean, we currently don't know who the next SEC chair is going to be. There are lots of rumors. Just again,
I'm not in the running. Just to be clear.
Are you sure?
So.
Are you sure
he thinks he is? He's not certain, because of course the truth is nobody knows for certain.
Nobody
it's
knows,
the magic
right?
of Donald Trump. I'm not sure Donald Trump yet knows who he's going to pick for SEC chair.
It doesn't seem like it. So Jay Clayton, a former SEC chair in the first Trump administration, was put on as the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District as one of the first appointments. That was a pretty interesting signal, I think. He vocally came out for Stebbins, was it?
Clayton, you mean? Clayton
did,
I think,
yes.
I don't know if I've seen it reported, but there does seem to be significant support for Jay Clayton by some. This is very interesting, right? Because Jay Clayton was nominated for U.S. Attorney in the later days of the Trump admin, back when he was SEC chair and Trump was replacing his SDNY attorney then. I thought it was notable that Clayton got an early nod. U.S. Attorney for Southern District is important, but usually it's not named before anything happens at the major federal posts like DOJ. Attorney General nominee Matt Gaetz dropped out today as well. It was a big red letter day.
A lot going on today.
There's a lot going on today. It's going to be interesting, though. It definitely signaled to me that Jay Clayton's views matter deeply to Donald Trump. Little known fact, part of how he got the SEC job in the first place, and he was one of the few people confirmed on Jan 20, 2017, which is very rare for SEC chairs, is he wrote some email the day after the election in 2016. And in that email, he laid out a bunch of ideas of how you could change up SEC. And it got to Trump, and he was just like, that's my guy. So he's always had strong pull inside Trump world, to a surprising degree, even.
Interesting. I mean, what and did he do any of those things when he was SEC chair?
It's complicated. He did some things right, but you look back, and the number one thing that seems to have happened at the SEC, other than them surviving COVID, when we forget there was a big market crash in 20, is things he did around ICOs, and then also the finalizing of the best interest rule, which was an alternative to the fiduciary standard the Department of Labor promulgated, was pulled back by the early Trump admin.
Right. And so that first Trump admin, it was an SEC that was hostile towards crypto, and one that had no interest in equity market reform, which is obviously what we spend a lot of our time on. This next SEC is certainly going to be very different with its approach to crypto. I think that's an easy one. Now it's interesting because
Dave, sorry, I
yeah,
just want to interject for a quick sec. The question is different how, right?
Okay.
So if the answer is they're not going to bring all these enforcement actions, but they're going to write rules that make no sense, then it's not that I want the enforcement actions back. I want fewer enforcement actions and rules that make sense.
Yes.
And so I've been saying to everybody who asks, and since you invited me on this program, you have asked.
Yeah, that's right.
We have to be just as vigilant about what's going to happen and what's going to be proposed in this supposedly pro-crypto world, whatever that means. Because those of us who spend all of our time eating, drinking, marinating in crypto and blockchain, we understand the knock-on effects of different rule proposals in ways that the folks who don't marinate in it don't understand it. And so we need to continue to advocate. We need to continue to especially educate, and we need to be very on point about language and definitions and all of that stuff, because it all is going to make a difference, regardless of whether people are quote unquote pro crypto or quote unquote anti crypto. And so it's not just at the SEC too, right? This is the CFTC, this is Treasury, this is the banking regulators, this is the FTC, this is the states. This is a big world where we still need to be talking to a lot of people.
Okay, so do me a favor, both of you. Reconcile what you just said, Lee, which I think is really important, with what we have heard coming out of Doge, the committee, not the
Shiba Inu speaks.
Shiba Inu, in which Musk and Ramaswamy have been clear. They had an op-ed, I think, in the Journal, and they said something that really struck me. They're like, we're going to come in and we're going to recommend executive actions to strip away regulations that in this new post-Chevron world, right? Any regulation that we think is not explicitly authorized by Congress, it's going to be gone. Now, I don't know the extent to which they're actually going to do that, but how do you make crypto policy as a regulatory agency in the absence, in that kind of environment, in the absence of any congressional mandate?
So the way I do it is I look back, it's forgotten now, but one of the topics that came up during the oral arguments on Loper Bright, the repeal of Chevron, which is referenced in the op-ed, was that Chevron had prevented legislation from happening on Capitol Hill because the SEC Chair Gary Gensler was generally saying no legislation is needed. So I can't respond to how this applies to, say, issues on permitting, an energy department, or issues around how benefits are provided at the Social Security Administration. But when it comes to crypto, right, there's been an acceptance that large chunks of the market are not currently within regulatory ambit, like the spot market. So if you pass legislation, new legislation that provides additional regulations, there's no conflict at all with Doge. And I think that's the thing, right, is that you're not seeing anyone on the Republican side of Capitol Hill saying legislation is not going to happen now. If anything, I know I keep seeing discussions about how they can do legislation even now in the lame duck. So my guess is that you're going to see the Trump admin lean into, we'd like to have legislation passed in a bipartisan way on crypto.
Okay.
I think that's right. And again, that's why I think we need to be super vigilant, because well-meaning people can still end up drafting language that doesn't make any sense, or can be influenced by people who want them to draft language that doesn't make any sense, or that causes more problems than it solves. And there's a lot of work to do here. One of the things that I think, one of the other things that I think could happen is I think you could start to see some no action relief out of the SEC and out of the CFTC to clarify sort of where they stand on certain things. Now, no action relief does not have the force of law. It does not have the force of a rulemaking, but it tends to guide the way the regulatory agency is thinking at that moment, particularly at the SEC and the CFTC. A great example that one of my friends cites all the time is how asset-backed securities came to be regulated, right? There was no paradigm for regulating asset-backed securities when they started getting popular. And what happened was the different banks started coming in and getting no action relief. And there was a series of no action letters that then became the basis for a proposed rulemaking that then became the basis of the final rules that were the original Reg AB. And there's no reason that that paradigm cannot work here. And again, I will stress at both the SEC and the CFTC. And so I think I am stressing to people that we need to start talking with both of those agencies about no action relief sooner rather than later, because hopefully we can get some of the low-hanging fruit that way.
I think that makes so that makes a lot of sense to me. So day one, there are things that regulatory agencies can do pretty quickly. No action letters, as an example, probably a shift in sort of the posture of enforcement. That's another relatively straightforward change. Are there other things you can think of while the legislation is going through the meat grinder?
I mean, the banal answer, right, is figure out agencies need to come together and figure out who has what jurisdiction. We
Yeah.
are blessed in this country by having 9
100%.
financial regulators, which I actually think is not a bad thing. Though, this is an example that Doge may come at us because, Singapore's got 1, the UK's got 3. In theory, this means they're all smaller and more responsive to the public.
Canada's
but it
the
does
only
mean
major country that doesn't even have one federal
is
regulator.
they're all provincial, right? Everyone just listens to Ontario. No, but this is the thing where, as a result, when you have something new that's not already fit into each of the very funnily shaped holes of the pegboard, you can have basically a drop ball between them all. And that's kind of what's happened here. So there's a great amount that can be done of just interagency dialogue, which I will say there's discussion about a White House crypto czar by the Trump admin. The Harris team was talking about this too, because of course the Harris campaign started to kind of appreciate that this had been a kind of overlooked issue in a long way. In a lot of ways over the last few years. And so I think that's just actually good government to have someone in making sure there's not crossed wires. This happened in intelligence back in the 90s. You had all this thing called stovepiping, where people would not share information between FBI and CIA and NSA. And they created, the Director of National Intelligence to prevent that. In some ways, crypto is, for finance, a version of that intelligence failure, and that so few people agree even on who has what, that the whole system just kind of breaks down.
I very strongly agree with what you just said, Justin. And to me, getting the right person in that crypto czar or whatever they're going to call it role would be great, because they will see across all the different issues, right? We talk a lot about the SEC and the CFTC. We need to be including FinCEN in the conversation. We need to be including OFAC in the conversation. We need to be including the IRS in the conversation. Obviously, the banking regulators. So all different kinds of things are happening. And what I think policymakers and regulators haven't started appreciating until comparatively recently is that blockchain technology allows you to tokenize pretty much anything. And so the idea that all that's happening is some variation on Bitcoin is finally getting debunked more broadly than just, me waking up every morning saying it's not just Bitcoin.
This is the number one thing folks don't understand is crypto is a software platform at heart. And
100%.
that has been just inscrutable to a lot of people in the Biden amendment. I've never understood why. I think it's that this was not seen as a major topic during their transition period. And when you're in an admin, I know this from experience, it's very hard to adjust to new information because you're just so busy all the time. It's like you basically create a self bubble. I think when I tell people that, 20% of voters own crypto. And like in our poll we did in March, 7% own more than $1,000, and 5% of voters in October said they described themselves, of all voters, as single issue crypto voters. People look at me with like slack jaw, or they say that's not possible. And I think this is an example, right, of where those of us in DC policy circles became disconnected from the average person. Because one thing I love to note is, if I'm talking to people who are in senior roles in the admin that I'm in crypto, they'll look at me almost with like disdain. When I mention I'm in crypto in an Uber, the driver's always interested. And I think that speaks to a divide on this topic that's been to the detriment of policymakers.
Yeah, I have the exact same experience, Justin. And the funny thing is, they're all giving me tips about what trading I should be doing. And I'm like, dude, go spend your money however you want to, but
this
not
is not
buying
financial
a meme
advice.
coin.
This is not financial advice.
Not
I mean,
my,
it is really the case. I mean, I've seen people. I mean, we dropped polling today that 55. I think it was, of the percent of people who are crypto owners who voted this election, it was a little under 15%. They voted for Trump 55-42, and the non-holders had a tie race. And this is a population, crypto owners, that voted for Biden over Trump 4 years ago. I don't think this is the only reason that Trump won the election, but the Trump team really leaned into this. And the Biden team was shocked by this in the early summer before they dropped out. The Harris team started to catch up to it. But I think even they were like, why are we having to deal with this? And the answer is, you've just not been paying attention to where people are moving on this. And a lot of the folks who swung against Harris, young men, non-white men in particular, were very big percentage holders of crypto. And I think that's going to be one of those things that comes up a lot in Democratic postmortems, is they now we figure out, how did we get here? Where do we go?
The Digital Chamber sponsored a poll that came out shortly before the election that had some pretty interesting statistics in it too. And it very much mirrored what you said, Justin, is lots of voters are thinking about the issue. They don't all know what they think, and they don't have firm views necessarily, but they are thinking about it, and it's part of their day in a way that makes sense, right? There's a lot of different things going on, and as we see more tokenization of more different kinds of things, what I think will happen is the technology piece will recede into the background for most people, right? Just like I don't know how my iPhone works. Most people aren't going to know how the underlying blockchain works, but it's going to be playing a bigger and bigger role in the way that the builders build their technology. Not to shill Avalanche too hard, but if you haven't played off the grid yet, if you haven't played off the grid, you've got to play. If you're a gamer at all, you've got to play off the grid. It's a totally cool game. And you get bionic limbs in the game. You're the player. You get bionic limbs, and all the other NPCs and players have bionic limbs. You can take their bionic limbs from them. Each bionic limb is an NFT. If you have a bionic limb with more power than bionic right arm with more power than mine, I kill you and take your arm, right? And so
I'm literally stealing money from you.
Yeah. And well,
that's what PvP is in a lot of the professional leagues. I mean,
but all that blockchain stuff has receded to the background.
How cool is that? Yeah,
it's all about playing the game now, and I think that's where the future of the technology is. I've thought that for a long time, and this is all about what's going to be the foundational technology in a tech stack. It's not going to be about just trading coins.
And this is something you know this, Dave, because you're a deep follower of market infrastructure and how it dictates market effects, market function. So much of our current piping is bad. And one thing that's always fascinated me and pulled me toward this space is how you can resolve a lot of the problems with it, the slowness, the opacity, the information flow, the lack of sovereignty with this, and I've always been surprised that you get two kinds of people, who come into crypto from government. Some are just, very into tech, and some are deep market knowledge people. And I've always been fascinated that there's not been as much cross-pollination back the last few years. I hope that changes and more people come and work in this and say, I can make government work better in part by having crypto blockchain rails, I can find ways to make the system fairer, that reduce a lot of the problems in the traditional equity space through this technology. Go back into policy roles.
Yeah, it's been, I mean, it's been so far, unfortunately, kind of nonstop failures in terms of trying to turn the behemoth of the traditional financial services industry towards this, right? I mean, like, you know, that's not, there are some success stories, of course, but like they're generally small scale, pilot level, or, you know, not quite ready for prime time. Whereas the efforts to like change settlement and clearing to be blockchain based in Australia, for example, just fell
Yeah.
flat on its face, right?
I-
And you know, oh, sorry, you know, like the peer-to-peer, like the direct non-centralized clearing things that were being done, not by you guys at Paradigm. What's the other P crypto firm?
There's a lot of P's. I will
Paxos.
say
I
that like
know, yeah.
the Australia
Paxos.
one, I think, was because it was permissioned. I think was the big problem. Trying to do permission can be problematic, but no one's increasingly the movement toward permissionless. I did see that someone said today PayPal went down for 2 hours, but their stable coin kept working. So I think we're starting to get there for the first time. And
Yeah,
partly there's
yeah.
a scale issue, also a technical knowledge.
Yeah,
But
it's been a lot of
Although
parallel
don't say
efforts,
it
and
that quickly, Justin, because
I
Sui was
like to
down for a
note,
couple hours today.
I will never, nobody's perfect, but I would also note, a lot of it, speaking as a lawyer, comes from lawyers, or us lawyers are typically bad at technology. And you can't solve everything just with tech, but neither can you solve nothing with tech. And I think the solution, of course, is to marry smart regulation with smart technological change.
yeah, and Paxos was the firm I was trying to think of, and like they're, you know, they're peer-to-peer clearing, super interesting technology, but again, pilot phase still, and
They
it's
got no action. They got no action relief from the SEC on it, but it's kind of never went anywhere. I do
right.
think your overall point is correct, Dave. That traditional financial services organizations have not pushed to get blockchain as a bigger
Too
part of
many
their tech stack.
intermediaries making too much money, right? Too many people profiting from the current
I
closed system.
I definitely have some sympathy for that, but you know, you've worked at large organizations that started building their tech stacks in the 1960s or 70s. You
Yeah,
know what it's like to try to
for sure.
replace
Yeah,
that tech stack.
of course.
And that's not a criticism. That's that it doesn't matter if you're a bank or whatever you are. When you're trying to rebuild your tech stack, it takes a huge amount of time and energy and build. And you can't just flip the switch. You can't just turn off the old tech and turn on the new tech. You got to run everything in parallel. And I mean, heck, you know, I've been at organizations where we've changed contract management systems and that we run parallel just to make sure we're okay, right?
And he lived to tell the
So
tale.
Yeah.
I'm still here, but you know that kind of stuff. It's a lot of work. So you need all of the big players to be doing the experimentation, doing the POCs that we see, and all of this other stuff. That is all going to germinate, I hope, into a bigger push. Now, the really interesting question is how much is DeFi going to drive the traditional financial services companies to push faster, to do more, to give more options? And you know, with the markets going the way they are, it's probably going to attract more people into DeFi, and that's going to put pressure on everybody to build and adapt and adopt.
So what do you guys think? You know, let's prognosticate here. Let's look forward. And I would say the two questions: what do you think, and what do you hope the next 4 years brings? Right? Like, where does the crypto industry, from a legislative and regulatory and oversight perspective, sort of land? You know, a few years from now, and what does that mean for the price of Bitcoin? Sorry. I couldn't help myself.
Okay.
You really can't help yourself.
It's just like I look, I don't know if I think I told both you guys this, but like, the first time I bought Bitcoin was at $2. So like this is just so totally surreal to
Congratulations on
me.
your
Well,
80,000%,
yeah, I wish. I
diamond
was too
hands
much of a
here.
trader, so it was both the best trade and the
He
worst
was
trade I've
buying
ever
pizzas with
made
that
in my
$2
life.
Bitcoin,
Yeah,
Justin.
it's like when I bought it too and it went to 1,000, we were like, what? And
I know.
who wouldn't sell except for like my crazy friends who didn't sell and now they're very happy. But it is totally surreal to see it at 100,000 right now and thinking that it could be much higher.
Yeah.
But again, we're not here to talk about
I mean, I wish I knew where the price went because I'd be in a different line of work or I wouldn't be working. It's interesting, right? On the what I hope, I actually will say my number one hope is that we stop debating whether this will exist and start debating how does this grow in a safe way. Um, I don't think it's the case that it's funny, right? 4 or 5 years ago, Democrats were seen as the more pro-crypto party, and over the last few years, it's become seen as a Republican thing, in part because of Donald Trump's support, in part because of choices made by the Biden admin. I keep hoping and expecting that Democrats will realize that a lot of the values of crypto are values they share: decentralization, the idea that large tech companies and banks can't control your data and your lives,
it. Yeah.
the idea of radical decentralization, transparency, innovation. So my hope is that we just basically normalize this, where we're debating different visions for how crypto should grow and not about whether or not we should allow it. And that's what I do think you're going to get there, because I sense that a lot of Democrats realize that these are people who are their voters traditionally, and they're losing their own voters, which shows you they're off track. Um, I'll let Lee give his answer before I keep kind of soliloquying.
I mean, look, I've been trying to be as nonpartisan about this stuff as possible, so I'm not even going to touch the political divide point. I I do think, Justin, you're spot on again on the hope. And look, there are going to be a lot of interesting policy questions to sort out here. And part of that is because the technology can be used in so many different ways, and part of that is because the sort of native DLT tokens, the cryptocurrencies, if you will, are kind of a new asset class, and figuring out what kinds of markets we want for those, what kinds of disclosures we want for new asset classes, what kinds of overall regulation we want for issuers, to the extent that there's an issuer, and then on top of that, how we're going to deal with the fact that autonomously functioning code that nobody can shut down now exists in the world. And the law just doesn't have good ways of thinking about autonomously functioning code right now. And so we need some really smart people to sit down and start to think about that and propose some ways to deal with it. If we default to, well, it's just software, and so the developer of the software can say, hey, I hope this works, but if it doesn't, I'm sorry, but I'm not liable. That's a choice that has been made in most major jurisdictions about software for the last 30 years, 40 years. And I don't know that that's a choice that's going to continue for the next 30 or 40 years. It poses some really interesting questions for really smart legal scholars to start to think about.
I mean, that's the thing about crypto, is that there's very few easy questions in policy spaces. There are a lot of very hard ones. I like hard questions. I think Lee likes them too. I think Dave, even though they frustrate you, like them. So the solution in some ways, right, is to get a lot of the different interests, the
Yeah.
skeptics and the
Yep.
big supporters and everyone in between, and try to build a consensus that everybody can live with and like. It's a very hard job. I wish whoever is going to take that cross up the absolute best. But there's going to be a great debate, right, in Congress, I think, over the next few years of how this should be approached inside the Trump administration. What I will note, right, is that we're the last developed country to kind of grapple with this at a baseline level. Nobody's figured out how to deal with DeFi yet, obviously, but Europeans have Mika. The UK's passed stablecoin and baseline market structure for CeFi. The Japanese did the payments act about, I think, 8 years ago now. Hong Kong is making progress. Singapore's made progress. We're the laggards. So I think we got to, I hope, figure out a way to catch up, because otherwise it's not helping anybody. It's not helping the industry. It's not helping the government. It's not helping investors, not helping consumers. Just, something has to happen.
Do you think even with all of that, like where does the US stand? I can't say I have a good sense for like where most of, the advances and innovation in crypto is happening, but it still feels like most of it's happening in the US. And I'm not going to say like, this is not to say it's clearly a global industry. There's clearly a lot going on in other places, but it still feels to me like even with all of this and with the essential like SEC attack on crypto over the last few years, do you think that that's really hindered U.S. sort of innovation and dominance in the industry?
I do. I mean, I'll tell you that I had, back when I consulted before going to the SEC at the start of the Biden admin, a client who was in the process of being naturalized, working on a crypto app. And in 21, he told me, I'm giving up. I'm leaving the US. I'm going to Singapore. We lost a citizen. We lost several jobs. We lost a business. If you look at the developer report that Electric Capital does, they definitely indicate there's been all the growth in developers is overseas. So I don't think it's been fatal, but like if I, break my arm on a fall, I can still get up and walk, but I probably can't run a marathon. And I kind of think that is what we did here. But it's never too late to mend, never too late to fix. I would also note, right, that like even in the Biden admin, it's not like the 1600 view pin was, we hate this entire industry. A lot of them just didn't care. Conversely, you had agencies that did care, but I mean, you had some agencies like the SEC that really, I think, disliked a lot of crypto at a molecular level for reasons I still don't understand, frankly. And hopefully just getting that back on track helps a lot. It is notable to me, right, that like you sense how much things have shifted just because of like the pressure ending. There's an old like Yiddish parable my in-laws tell me about a woman in like the shtetl in Poland who is driven crazy by how awful her house is. She's like, goes to a rabbi. Rabbi, my house is so chaotic. He says, I see the problem. Put a pig in the house. She said, Rabbi, it's worse than ever. Now there's a pig running around. Get a horse in there. Rabbi, this is terrible. The horse and the pig are fighting. Get a cow in there. Rabbi, this is out of control. Now the rabbi says, take the horse, the cow, and the pig out. How's the house feel? Really comfortable. And I kind of think that's what we've gotten over the last few weeks is just removing all the wild animals, which is both comforting and damning.
I like that. I'm definitely going to use that one. That's a good one.
Steal it with my love.
I'm going to be like, Justin's grandmother tells this great.
My mother-in-law. My mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law. Sorry.
Even better. That's what makes it even better story.
So here's okay. What I think is maybe the risk that keeps me up right now is the concern of swinging too far. Now, right? Like, do we run the risk of, okay, this is going to be the most crypto-friendly administration ever, and we're going to stop policing markets, and we're going to stop being where anything goes, and we don't want any regulate. I mean, this is going to be a very deregulatory few years. I think maybe shockingly so relative to things we have seen in the past. Do we run the risk of a second coming of like ICO fraud type, where people are really getting hurt, really losing money, and it's things are just running rampant?
I mean, it's worth noting, right, that you're still seeing even the Republicans post the election saying they want legislation. You're not seeing people say they want no regulation of crypto whatsoever. You're seeing the industry say we still want smart regulation. So I definitely
can we get there?
Well,
can we get smart regulation?
I'm an eternal optimist. I will always believe we can. I will beat my head against the wall. I don't think so often in finance you have to wait for an epochal financial crisis for regulation, but not every time. People forget the futures market was regulated without a crisis in the 70s. CFTC was born 50 years ago without a financial crisis. It can be done. It's not easy, but I think you can do it, and I think you have to come in noting that like the job is to make this work to do triage and to not make, the perfect the enemy of the good?
As long as Justin and I are not beating our heads on opposite sides of the same wall, I'll feel okay about the whole situation because I'm big. I'm big about smacking this thing up against the wall all the time.
Yeah.
Look, there's one thing that virtually everybody agrees on, which is fraud is bad,
Yeah.
and
And fraud is illegal.
well, and it's illegal because it's bad.
Yeah.
So,
But to police it, you have to resource enforcement
100%,
divisions, and
100%.
now you have to take everything to court versus, internal adjudication. So that's additional
Well,
cost and
we can
complexity.
have a longer discussion about whether that is actually what the Constitution requires, which, I have had long discussions with many non-US people about how silly some of the constitutional rules are in the US. And I remind them that, you call that some silly rule. I call that the Constitution, and I'd rather have a Constitution. So thank you very much. So, but leaving that aside, right? Look, the SEC is pretty good at catching insider trading. We see lots of insider trading cases, and we can argue about whether or not that's fraud, but it is securities fraud under the way the rules work. The SEC catches lots of different kinds of fraud, and the CFTC catches lots of different kinds of fraud. Most regulators and law enforcement are good at catching fraud. And look, some of these people are going to be able to run and hide all over the world. That's going to pose issues for everybody. But again, most everybody is in agreement that we should be stopping fraud. It's just a question of what are the tools that are available in the toolbox to stop the fraud. And so that's the kind of stuff that we should be talking about. And
the tools and the resources. I mean, do you think, given Elon Musk's influence, that he's going to be
resource?
Yes, that he's going to want to resource SEC enforcement.
Look, Dave,
this is a thing that actually is very important.
That's the wrong question.
Sorry,
that's the wrong question, right?
Okay.
Like, if you want to have a political discussion, then I recommend you swap me out for somebody who's going to really engage.
I'm not trying to make it political. I'm just trying to be practical.
But
I'll make it political.
But look, we don't know what's going to happen, right? And to my earlier point, we all have a lot of work to do. Whatever side you're on, whatever your belief is on how this should work or not work, on how it should be resourced or not resourced, et cetera, et cetera. We all have a lot of work to do because the new administration says it's going to be very different than the old administration, and we need to see how it's going to be different. And we need to have really smart people who spend time educating and advocating and doing the work so that dumb things don't happen.
This is important. Like, if people forget, the way the SEC gets funded is off of trades in the traditional equity space.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that came up a lot in efforts to do legislation over spot authority was to give that same power to the CFTC by basically doing a small, infinitesimal margin, a basis point tax on crypto trades, because you could never get it through Intercontinental Exchange or Chicago Mercantile Exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So the money's there, the resources are there. I think whether or not DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, dramatically cuts government, it's definitely the case that there is the resources, even from the Trump administration side, to find a way to help crypto grow and be regulated. So while there is a real political debate to be had over, I think, DOGE and what it means for other parts of the government, I don't think that's applicable here, which is, not, I'm sure, a lot of comfort to some people at, say, other three-letter agencies that are non-financial. But I don't think this is going to be as big of a problem for this topic and for the SEC and CFTC and other similar agencies.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. That's exactly what, I hope to happen, right? That this is an area that is not targeted for reduction. It needs to be resourced properly. I think that's all I'm saying. Yeah.
And I'll go further.
And the resources need to be focused properly.
Yes, they do. And look, it's definitely the case that the SEC could use a reorg. That's not happened in a long time. There's 25 divisions. You could like move them to make them more effective. That is not, right or left. It's just smart. But I'll also note that, for the first time in several years since the election, I had career staff at the SC reaching out, asking to learn and how can they figure out how should we approach crypto. So like, I think the seeds are there for actually having better engagement, better regulation. And it's a pity it's taken an election, but
Yeah.
it's happened. And I think now you're seeing growth in that way.
Do you think we'll
And there
get
are
like a
definitely
crypto
people.
advisory committee at the SEC?
I mean, look, FinHub is already there, and there are people in FinHub who are very sophisticated about blockchain and crypto and very knowledgeable about this stuff. So, to Justin's point, the seeds are there. It's just a question of, are they going to be able to grow? And so we have to advocate for them to grow, and we have to advocate to be part of the process. One of the things that I think is super important, and I think we've all said this previously on this call, but I'm going to reiterate it again, is that we need to open up these processes. We need to have constructive debate and discussion go on here. Justin earlier said we need the skeptics and the true believers. I don't think he actually said true believers, but I'm put the words in his mouth.
I said
But
supporters.
supporters. Okay. So, right, we need both sides, and we need the people who are somewhere in the middle, and we need that discussion to really play out.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the best panels that I'm on are the panels where you have three other people from different backgrounds who have different views on blockchain and crypto and different levels of knowledge on it, and everybody has a good, open, honest exchange about what they know and what their views are, and sit there and they're willing to be convinced, right? And we need those kinds of open-minded people at the regulators. We need them at the trade associations. We need them as general counsels and founders. We need them throughout. That's the way a good society functions. That's the way good regulations get made. That's the way good commerce happens. All of the good things flow from those kinds of from people with that kind of attitude, and that's what we need to be encouraging rather than discouraging. And I think there's a good argument that that kind of open debate and dialogue was discouraged over the past 4 years. And if it's going to be encouraged in the next 4 years, then I think that will be a better state of affairs.
I think this is really important, that there has not been as much discussion from how people who don't like crypto would like to see it regulated as I would have liked. I keep asking for, give me the Elizabeth Warren version of how to pass legislation on crypto. And I think that would be great to see. One person of a financial reform group, one I've worked with a lot, told me on Twitter a few months ago that your request to meet with us is inherently like neoliberal or something, that like the act of meeting is itself corrupting. And I was like, I don't agree with that at all. I'll meet with everybody. I was like, would you? And I think that's been part of the problem. The assumption that if you're in the industry or you like the industry, you are not worth talking with, which I think only inures to the detriment of not just the public, but of people trying who don't like this space to, figure out a way to regulate it. It's one of the reasons I love talking to you, Dave, because you're so willing to bring on board all sorts of folks.
I mean, I think it's crazy to stay in an echo chamber or to not hear from every side. It doesn't make any sense. It only makes things worse, right? And so, I mean, I hear you both, and I unfortunately we're just in total agreement on this point.
Violent
right?
agreement. It's one of those things where I do wonder if this period of almost glasnost, I've seen a lot more people say to me, I should have spoken up more that crypto, we need to do something on that. I'm like, well, I wish you'd done it 2 years ago, but it's good you're doing it now. So hopefully that alone also will come up with a better path forward for everybody. This shouldn't be partisan or political. It's not partisan or political in either country, right? It should be about what the goal is of a society and how it meets the broader goals of whether you want more or less social safety net, whether you want more or less, taxes, whether you want more or less certain aspects of change, not about like whether technology is good or bad.
No, and I mean, look, I'm someone, for example, that I think crypto. I've long been very excited by the technology and the opportunity that it can represent to people who don't have lots of opportunities in the traditional system, right? And it is encouraging to hear that it's something that now, as you guys are finding out in your polling, is permeating more of the population, especially people, again, who have been left behind by the current system. Like I'm an investor in a company that like enables crypto purchases in Africa, and these are they're tiny purchases, and but it's something where they're in countries where they cannot depend on the currency,
Yeah.
and this brings them financial stability. It gives the unbanked all of these amazing services that they wouldn't ordinarily have access to. Like there's so much that crypto can enable, and it has been extremely disappointing. And as much as I've supported the SEC's efforts on equity markets reform, crypto has been a total sore spot, a total failure. At the same time, as we're saying, like fraud is fraud, and it has to be policed. And I don't think that we have done a good job of that, or I don't believe enforcement authorities have done a very good job of that. Even with the focus that the SEC has had on it, because like I think, as your guys are saying, that they've been focused on they've been spending way too much time on the wrong things from an enforcement perspective.
Back when he worked on Dodd-Frank at CFTC, something I deeply supported, Gary Gensler liked to say, 95% of people who work on Wall Street are good people, and then 5% are, break the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish that had been the approach on crypto.
Yeah.
And because there's a need for a smart SEC that's going after frauds and not going after just the biggest names. And I wish we'd gotten that version of Gary Gensler, because I think it would have been really
Supposed to the one that went
superior.
after Kim Kardashian.
There's going to be books written about this, I'm sure, and I look forward to reading them.
You haven't even thought about that in a while, have you?
There's a whole
Yeah,
lot.
I agree.
There's a whole thing there. Yeah.
All right. Anything we missed, and any final points you guys want to make about, what you think is going to unfold over the near term, especially, like what do the next couple of months hold for us? Or is it impossible to say because we can't see Trump's binder?
It's never impossible. I mean, I obviously expect the unexpected with President Donald J. Trump, but I would say I do think the thing about an election where your party loses the popular vote for the first time in 20 years is kind of a wake-up call. It forces a lot of hard questions in a way that Democrats have not had since the last time it happened in 2004. I actually think you'll see a big movement toward kind of embracing technology, in part because I think like things like crypto is like we can't just be the party that's anti-tech. I like to point out that traditionally it's the left that's pro-technology. It's been true since the French Revolution. Marx was a huge fan of technology. Even like British militant in the 80s, which is our hardcore Trotskyist faction, was stressing how important technology is to growth. It's true for everybody. It's been a weird period where it's Democrats that are more anti-tech than Republicans. Yeah. And I bet that period's drawing to a close because, again, one of the great ways the world has been uplifted from poverty is technological change.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you can't just have no rule of law, but it does mean that generally innovation is good. And I think that is going to come back into fore over the next few months, and it's in particular regarding crypto.
The only thing I'll add to what I think was an excellent articulation by Justin there is we need to find ways to incentivize the good actors, right? When good actors swamp out the bad actors, we get great technological development that benefits everybody or a large number of people. When we allow the bad actors to swamp out the good actors, because the bad actors are the ones that are willing to take the risk of getting caught and whatnot, and we make the rewards for them so high that they're willing to take the risk, that's when negative things happen. And I think there are things that the Congress can do to incentivize good actors. I think there are things that the regulators can do to incentivize good actors. And I hope those things will start to happen. And by the way, not just for blockchain and crypto, for AI, for tech is everywhere, and development and making stuff better is everywhere. I just was listening to this podcast on the new way to make computer chips. using high-powered lasers and tin, and it was very, very confusing for a novice like myself. But right, they spent 30 years figuring out how to do it, and now they can get millions and millions of circuits on one chip with this new process. And so Moore's law is going to continue, and those kinds of developments are just going to make things better for humanity. But we've got to give people the incentives to do that.
And also, hopefully, we can use technology to fix some of the longstanding problems in the markets, in equity spaces, Dave, which you've been putting such a light on for so many years. We've never fixed,
I hope so.
GameStop ended, but wasn't fixed. And I do think, right, you see a lot of the same threads that's in crypto, that's in GameStop, and the efforts of market structure reformers, that's in AI. And they all speak to the degree to which a lot of our society is, online in certain ways, but is not yet updated 21st century tech in other ways. And applying some of those nascent technologies can make everything work better and make everyone happier.
Yeah, I remember presenting to the SEC and CFTC many years ago before CAT. And I was like, here's how you use cloud-based technology to surveil markets. You should do this. And then CAT will come in, I don't know how long. And they were like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever, move on.
It's definitely the case
so,
that too often people don't take tech seriously in market regulation. But hopefully that's what's going to change, because it does make things better for everyone, including the regulators.
I know. I'm generally speaking like a techno utopian in my outlook toward the world, and I hope that we're entering a period of time where exactly. I mean, I love how you're saying it, Lee. The put the incentives in place to get the good people to do good things. Like that's everything. That's how markets can function bottom up, right? And how you don't need to have onerous top-down regulation. You write the right incentives, and then you let every individual and company and organization working their butts off make the world a better place. So I hope that's the world we get to see. We'll see.
And
we'll come
arguably,
back.
that's a core function of government.
Right. That's right.
Not the only function, and it's not the only one who does it, but it is arguably a core function of government.
So this will be fun. We'll revisit this conversation at some point after there's some clarity, some motion, maybe some legislative achievements that we can all hang our hats on and be proud of. So really, thanks guys for coming. Really appreciate your insight and your opinions, and always a pleasure.
Great to see you both.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for dropping by and listening. If you're on YouTube, give us a like and a subscribe, and if you're on Twitter, let us know what you thought. I'm sure you will. You always do. So this has been another Let's Talk Markets Live, and we'll be back next week. Oh no, sorry. Next week is the holiday. I'm going to be on holiday. I'm traveling. But the week after, we'll actually have Rob Shapiro on, formerly in the Clinton administration, and is since then an economic consultant who focuses on abusive short selling and market manipulation. So we will have a great conversation with him. But until then, thanks guys, and thanks everyone for listening.
Happy Thanksgiving.